All right, you guys have been asking me for weeks to make this video that I promised, and here it is. I'm going to be talking about how to set up AppLocker, a very comprehensive tutorial. AppLocker is basically a tool in Windows 10 and 11 Pro editions and up that lets you create a locked down version of Windows using a whitelist or allow list strategy for what programs can even run. So no viruses can just run without your knowledge because they are not explicitly allowed, for example. And I've talked about previously how AppLocker is one of the big reasons why I was not hacked a few weeks ago, even though I accidentally downloaded a malicious script and it actually tried to run. Now, I want to be clear, this is definitely not for everyone. It is going to have a big trade-off in convenience versus security. You'll be able to still run any programs you want, but you might have to occasionally go in and create specific rules for every program, but at the same time, that also makes it theoretically impossible, or at least extremely unlikely, that you'll accidentally run a virus, or more likely, a program you do trust will download something that is malicious and run it without you knowing, which is what happened to me. Now, of course, nothing is ever 100%. There could be exploits that get around things, but I would say this is the strongest security strategy you can use because it's proactive instead of reactive. So if you're someone like me who is completely paranoid when it comes to computer security, then this is right up your alley. But if you're someone who's not exactly technically savvy, you probably want to maybe still watch it to learn some things or two, but you might not want to go through all this. Also, this will require you have Windows 10 or 11 Pro editions or higher. I tried to look for ways to get around it. There doesn't seem to be any. I guess you could theoretically use the Windows Pro Watermark edition, but I'm not going to condone piracy. Before I jump in, I guess I'll give you a quick outline for exactly the different major sections I'm going to be talking about, and then probably some other topics within each one. And you can, of course, look at the description for timestamps if you want to maybe not skip around. If you are going to use AppLocker, I would highly recommend the entire video, but if you want to come back to certain parts, timestamps should be helpful. As you can tell by the length of this video, I was very detailed in a lot of my explanations. I might seem to ramble or mumble at certain points, but there will be subtitles, so you can just read those if I talk too fast. Quick outline. First, I'm going to go over how to get to the AppLocker settings and also how to create a custom shortcut to get to them much faster than the usual way, because you're going to have to go into there every time you make a new rule. I'll then explain how to look at the event viewer log to see what things have been blocked, which is also essential for creating rules to allow things. And of course, I'll spend a considerable amount of time on actually creating the rules, the different types of rules, how they might interact. Then I have a whole section with really important info about how AppLocker interacts with PowerShell specifically. It might seem like an extra, but do not skip this section. It is critical to getting the full security out of AppLocker because so many viruses do take advantage of PowerShell. You really need to take care with that and do some additional stuff that I'll go over. And that will also include a section where I talk about PowerShell execution policies, they're called, which will block malicious scripts from running. But again, even if you know what execution policy is, I go into way more detail about more stuff, so you still need to watch that. So yes, this video is going to be very long. However, I do go over literally everything I know that I believe is important. Of course, if I forget or need to make any corrections, I'll put a pinned comment, or I think you can usually have a thing pop out now. And I guess we can just go to the computer and get started. The AppLocker settings are found here in the group policy editor, and you go to computer configuration, Windows settings, then security settings, application control policies, and then AppLocker. And here's where they all are. However, it's kind of a pain to navigate to this through the group policy editor every time. So there's actually a easier way where you can create a snap-in, it's called, where it takes you literally directly to here. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do here. So what you can do is search for mmc.exe and it should bring this up. What you'll do here is go to File, Add Remove Snap-in, then look for group policy object right here and hit Add. Then you can just hit Finish. Okay, then here you're going to navigate to the AppLocker just like we did. So now what we're going to do is when we found it in this one that we just made, we're going to do new window from here. And here we have a management console that leads directly to the AppLocker. So we just need to save this. So we'll do File, Save As, and whatever. And we could put it on the desktop or wherever. So I'll just put it in this folder and we can call this AppLocker Settings. Hit save. And what we'll also want to do is go to options and change this to either of these user modes, whatever, full access, because this will make it so it stays. Otherwise, it'll ask you to save every time. And then, yes, save that. So now every time we open it, it'll take us directly to the AppLocker settings. All right, now we're in the AppLocker settings, and you can see there are different sections with rules for different types of files. There's executables, Windows installer scripts, package app rules. And before we even create any rules, what we're gonna wanna do is right-click, go to Properties, and then we can basically change these from Enforce, Audit, or Not Configure, just uncheck it, and then they won't be enforced even if there are rules. And actually what we're going to want to do here is also enable it for DLLs. You don't necessarily have to create any DLL rules, but I think you probably want to at least be able to see them, so they'll show up here. And also, before we create any rules, we're going to want to change all of these to audit only, and then later, once you know how AppLocker is going to behave, you can change it to enforce once you understand it a bit. If you just start creating rules and blocking everything from the beginning, you might mess stuff up. So it's better to just audit it, check the logs. So to actually see the logs, what you would do is go into the event viewer. And normally this is where you would have to go. You'd have to go into the application and services, then Microsoft, Windows, then go down to AppLocker. And you're going to see that there are different views. So here's the EXE and DLL one, and the MSI script, and the other ones that we saw, the different groups that are over here. Now, again, we don't want to have to scroll all the way into here every time. So what we can do is just create a custom view. I did that here. And if you want to just copy the settings, this is what they are. You just, for the event log events, you just go and check what I just showed you, check this box. Or what I'll do is just put in the description this event custom view. I can export it as an XML file, and then all you'll have to do is right click on custom views, import custom view, and then look for the XML file that I give you. And then you should be able to see this, and this shows you issues or things that get blocked by AppLocker. Or in this case, if it's in audit mode, it'll say something would have been prevented from running. So that way you can, again, get everything set up and know what it's going to block ahead of time, so you don't get frustrated and make your computer unusable before you have proper rules set up. Now, what you could even do if you wanted it to open directly to here with a shortcut like on your desktop, again, we can create another snap-in. So we're going to do the same thing, mmc.exe. Then we go to File, Add Remove Snap-in, look for Event Viewer, and don't forget to hit Add first. So it should say local computer is what we want to select. Okay. Then just go to Custom View and AppLocker. And we can do this a couple different ways. So if you want to still have the rest of the event viewer showing, what you could do is just right click on this and say new window from here, like on the event viewer thing. And this will basically look the same as the normal event viewer. And then if you click to select this, this will be open when you go to hit File, Save As. Actually, first we want to, again, go to Options and then change this to just full access, whatever. Do not save. Change to this console. We'll hit OK, and then hit File, Save As, Event Viewer, AppLocker blocked. And now, if we go into here, it opens the event viewer directly to our custom filter. So that should be easier. All right, so now we have everything set up. We can actually use our little shortcut to open the AppLocker settings, and we're ready to actually create some rules. And we can start off with the executable rules, and you can right click and hit create default rules for all of these to get a starting point. But I personally don't actually like these default rules. I think for my taste, they're a bit too permissive, but for you, they might be perfect in a trade-off for what you want to deal with. So here by default, it's going to allow all files that are located in the program files folder to run any executable, and all files located in the Windows folder, and then all admins are allowed to run all files. However, if you're like me, where you're the only user on the computer and you're an admin, you definitely want to delete this because that will completely defeat the purpose. It does not ask you to escalate before it allows it. It'll just allow you to do it. So I would keep that just deleted. And then we can do the same thing for these other types of rules. So this is like an MSI installer. And again, just delete this. Script rules, this is going to be like batch scripts or PowerShell scripts. Packaged app rules, this is going to be like Microsoft Store stuff, I believe. And I think the default rule for this is just all signed app packages. I don't know where the DLL one went. So I'm going to hit apply there. So that shows up now, and just do the same rules here. I should also explain which file types actually apply for these various collections. I'll put them on the screen because they're pretty easy to just list out. But if you do go to create a new rule, it'll also show you. So if we do file hash, for example, and then open the browser, you'll see that it has a drop down, and these are the two ones. So just be aware, if you are looking for a specific file type, you might have to select it in here or it might not show up. And if we go to scripts, we can see that it does PowerShell, batch file, command prompt, VBS scripts, and JavaScript. But it's not going to block things like Python scripts or anything else. It's only these which are effectively built into Windows. That's why. But it can't control everything. It can't know everything because Python or some other scripting language, Windows doesn't have control over that. So in that case, you would be blocking the executable stage of whatever scripting language compiler would be running. Also, to be clear, the rules are only going to apply to those specific file types. So if you create a rule here that creates an allow for literally anything, just whatever, this will basically nullify all the rules. This will still only apply to the various script types that I just showed you. So this won't do anything with executables. So that's why you also want to make sure that you're putting the rules in the correct location, because if you wanted to allow all scripts and you accidentally put it in the executables section, then that's not going to be good. And that's also a common reason I found where if I thought it should be running and it's still being blocked, sometimes I just put the rule in the wrong place. Now, this is just a starting point. These are not actually the rules that I use, but this would get you a pretty good starting point. Now, one I like to do actually for all of these is to allow anything that is signed by an EV certificate. Basically, to get a code signing certificate, you have to go through a bunch of verification steps. It's very rare for malware to ever have this. Very occasionally it happens, but usually it's caught pretty quick. So what we can do is create a new rule, and then we're going to do allow. And by the way, once you enable any rules, it's basically like whitelisting or allow listing. So if there's any rules at all, then unless there is an allow rule for something, it won't run. So you don't need to deny anything using deny rules for things to be blocked. So right now, basically we need to add things that we do want to allow. So we can do publisher, and it has you choose a reference file. And a reference file basically is anything that's going to be signed by the company that you're looking for. In our case, we want anything that is signed by Microsoft, so we can go into the Windows and just do regedit, for example, and you can see it pre-fills this. However, we don't just want Microsoft to be allowed to run in this particular rule, so what we can do is just do custom values, and then we would set all of these to just be a star. And then this is, I think you can either leave that blank. Okay. And then we'll hit next. And then it says add exceptions, but we're basically allowing anything signed. So we can do all signed. Now, you might think, if you know anything about code sign certificates, will this allow literally anyone to self-sign a package? And the answer is no. It will only allow it to be run if it's a EV or organizational certificate signed by a root authority. So you will not be able to self-sign and have that count. So it has to be like a trusted certificate. Now, I personally delete these two rules, all located in the Windows folder and the program files folder. For a lot of people, this is probably fine to allow files located in the Windows folder and the program files folder, because presumably by the time an executable gets into those files, you already trusted the installer or the script that would have put the things in there, if that makes sense. So it's not like you're downloading malware directly into one of these folders. Usually first there's going to be a script that would copy it into there or something like that. I personally just deleted these, but you might want to keep this in just so after you installed something or if there's something already in the Windows folder, you can trust it. But if you want to be really secure, then you can just delete these. Now for the Windows installer rules, notice that there's already a default rule that says all digitally signed Windows installer file. And this is the same that we did. This actually says 00 and above. And then this one says all Windows installer folders that are in the Windows/installer location. I believe you can just delete this without really any consequence because anything that Microsoft puts out should still be signed. So you could probably just delete that and not have any issues again, but I would do this in audit mode first. Now for script rules, I would be more strict. So first let's create a rule that allows, again, EV signed scripts, code signed scripts. So we can just, again, do the same thing. But you're going to notice that nothing is showing up because it's restricted to just PowerShell scripts, batch scripts, and we don't really want to go searching for a script that's signed by Microsoft, just as an example. So what we can actually do is type in regedit again, and it'll still open it even though it's not a script. And we're only using this as a reference file. We don't actually care about it having to do with this file specifically. And again, we're just going to go do custom values, set all this. We can either set this to, 0 or a star. Doesn't really matter. Just hit next. And again, we do all signed. And then I personally would delete that rule because in my case, the virus that I came across, the first thing it did was try to copy a script into the C Windows temp directory. So if it was able to do that, the script would have been able to just run because there was a default rule for that. So I have all signed scripts, and I found that for the most part, I believe scripts in the C Windows directory are all signed by Microsoft anyway, so I don't think it should cause any problems, and you can always add exceptions or allow rules specifically if you need it. And again, program files, you can decide whether you want to allow this, because again, probably if there's going to be malware, it's going to have to be able to copy itself into the program files folder in the first place, and presumably there would be rules like the scripts or executables that are going to be not allowing that to happen in the first place. But if you want like a double layer, then you could just delete this. So I'll just show that here. Now for DLLs, I would have restrictions on these. DLLs are actually executables in themselves, and a lot of malware will be packaged within a DLL. So I would definitely restrict that too. And again, same idea with this, with the DLLs located. You can allow Microsoft DLLs, but this is a path rule. So I would probably, again, in audit mode, try just deleting this one, but changing it to a publisher rule. Because again, you don't know if a malware is going to copy its DLL into the Windows folder and then try to run it. So what we can do is same thing, but this time it's going to be a bit different. So we can do publisher again, reference file. Oh, that's why I couldn't find regedit before, because I went into System32. But if you just go into C Windows, you should be able to do that. Hit OK, and remember, even if it's not a DLL, it'll still show up. And here we can change the scope. And I just realized that I could have just dragged that up the whole time. So yeah, just do that instead of having to type everything in manually. I guess you can do that too, but for the previous ones, that's probably a lot easier. But we want to now allow anything that is created by Microsoft, obviously, to be allowed to run. So we're going to do publisher and next, and we're going to say all Microsoft. And so anything that's signed by Microsoft Corporation will be allowed to run. And this applies throughout the entire system. So presumably all the Microsoft DLLs are going to be signed. So I would delete that. And then I would at least create a rule to allow signed DLLs. So we do the same thing, and we can just drag it up to any publisher, hit next. Now I want to be clear that this is kind of a redundant rule here, because if there's all signed, then that's obviously going to include Microsoft, but I just like to be explicit. And again, if you maybe don't want this all signed rule, then you have to create this one separately anyway. And then again, I'm probably going to try and delete that, see what happens, because we're in audit mode. And then for packaged app rules, all signed packages, that's probably fine from the get-go. Now, inevitably, you are going to come across programs that you want to run that maybe are not signed or don't allow one of these rules, and you want to manually allow it. In that case, what you're going to want to do is, well, first, as just so I can demonstrate it, I'm going to change this to enforce. And then I have this example here. This is an unsigned file. And if I try to run it, you can see it says blocked by your administrator. This is what would happen. It might not happen every time if it's like running in the background, but if you try to run it manually, this is usually what will come up. And obviously, you know what that is. If you're not sure what just tried to run, again, you'd go back into the AppLocker event viewer and hit refresh. And then look at the most recent one. You can see it'll tell you that example.exe was prevented from running and the location. So say we wanted to explicitly allow this, what we would do is in the executable rules, make sure it's in the right section. So we do create new rule, and then it's an allow rule, and probably you want to do file hash. It's the most secure one. You could do path and use wildcards. I'll explain that in a second, but file hash will just allow that exact file. So we'll do browse files, find that, and you could actually select multiple if you wanted. So if you had like a whole bunch, you could just copy them all, but let's just do this. And again, if you don't see it, check to see if the dropdown, if it shows down there. So if it's a .com file or .exe, then you do hit open. And here's where the list of multiple would show up if you have multiple ones. So we can do manual allow example. And usually what I do is I have a set of rules that's just called manual allows like this. And then anytime there's something I want to add, I don't create a whole new rule for it. I just add it to this one using this, and it'll again make a whole list of it. So now this should run. And now when we try to run it, it does, it works. It popped up. Now, one thing I should mention is sometimes it takes a second for the rules to kick in. So if you go and create a allow rule and then immediately go and run it and it's still blocked, just give it a second, because it might take a few seconds for the rule to kick in for whatever reason. And if it's still not working after like 15 or 30 seconds, I would go check the rule to make sure that you applied it correctly, because I've done that. Maybe I picked the wrong file or something like that. And like I mentioned before, if you're in audit mode, you're going to get warnings in the log, not a error. So here is an example of a DLL, and I'm in audit mode for DLLs, remember, that was allowed to run but would have been prevented. And I forget what this is for, but native images, I'm pretty sure that's legit. So I would probably want to go in and make sure that I allow anything that is legitimate before I go and start enforcing it, because it might mess stuff up. DLLs are pretty important. Now, notice how we created these file hash allow rules, but there are these like path ones. So this allows an entire path. So WinDir is the same as C Windows, and then there's this asterisk, which is a wildcard. So we can create that, for example, if there's a program or like a location where you don't care what's in there, you just want to allow anything in there. Maybe it's like a personal folder for testing stuff. So we can do create new rule and then hit allow, and then we're going to select path. And here is where we would type it in. So we can just do like downloads/test folder. And what you would then do is use a wildcard. And you can construct this a few different ways, actually. So if you do this, it's just going to allow anything that's an executable, because this is an executable rule. If you created this in the script section, it would allow any scripts to run. But in this case, it's just an executable. Or what you could do is say you wanted to only allow batch files within this certain directory. And I know this is in the executable rule, but just pretend that it's a script rule. What you do is, if it's in the same exact folder as this, you could just do star.bat here. And I do want to point out a difference. If you have a rule like this where it's star.bat, it will only allow it in this folder specifically. And you might think, well, duh, but hold on. So this would allow in the downloads test folder, blah1.bat to run. But let's say you also had batch files in a subdirectory here, If the batch files are only in the subdirectory like this, and like this one wasn't here, then what you could do is just create a rule like this. So test folder, and then this basically says any subdirectory, and then any batch file in any subdirectory. And this applies multiple down, and that would allow you to run this. But if you had batch files that you wanted to allow in both this folder and subdirectories, you actually have to create two rules. So you would have to create this one and one for the main folder like this. So just be aware of that. It took me a bit to figure that out. Now, there are exceptions that you can create, and it's basically the same thing that we did before. So you can create a publisher path or file hash exception for a rule specifically. So say we wanted to create a exception for this default rule where it allows anything in the program files folder except some publisher. We could, again, go into here. It'll ask you for the reference file, or we could do a path, or we could do a specific file that's not allowed. Or we could also create a deny rule. Now, deny rules might seem redundant and unnecessary because everything is blocked by default unless there is an allow rule specifying it. But you could use a deny rule because a deny rule always overrides any allow rule. So if you literally had a rule to allow a certain file hash, and then you had a deny rule for the same exact file hash, and I actually went and created that here. So I have an example allow rule and a deny allow rule. So you're like, well, which one wins? Well, let's find out. If we try to run it, you can see it is blocked. So the deny rule always wins. So that can give you a little bit more control. In some circumstances, it might be easier to just create deny rules instead of exceptions for a bunch. And that could also be possible if you might have overlapping allow rules. So say there is a allow rule that allows files in the program files folder, and it's a signed file, so it would be allowed by both of these rules. Instead of having to go into the exceptions and creating it in both these rules, you could just create one deny rule in that case. Now, here I have a bunch of additional rules set up that I can explain, and what I'll do is actually just export this policy so you guys can literally just import it. I'll put a link in the description so you don't have to have all this set up. So by default, it'll allow all signed stuff, and then you can add or change these as you want. So let me explain a couple of these first. Some of these you might not have thought of. So these are ones that I call them toggler. I label it like this, and that's because some locations you might want to repeatedly allow, like this temp folder in the app data. A lot of times, if you try to go to install a program, even if the installer is signed, then you might get a issue with something that it uses during the install process being blocked that you want to allow. So in that case, I have this deny rule that allows anything in the temp folder. And what I can just do is change that to allow and then deny it again once the install is finished. And I have that for the executable as well. If you want to be more secure about it, you can go and specifically name the file exactly as the path, but that might be a little bit more work. So that's what this toggle one is. Now, for some of these, I also have some legitimate programs blocked that are sometimes used by malware. And because I don't really use these myself, I just have them blocked. So one is Process Hacker. It is a legitimate program. It's similar to Process Explorer, but a lot of times, again, malware might use it. A lot of antivirus actually blocks it by default anyway. Fortunately, it actually has it's actually signed, so I can just block that publisher because I don't know what else they publish, but probably not anything I'm familiar with. So I block that publisher, so that's going to block any versions of Process Hacker. And the reason I don't do a hash is because then you would need to block every single version of it, whereas all of them are probably going to be signed. And you could think, well, what if they just, use an unsigned version? Well, then it would be blocked because it's not signed. So this should specifically only block Process Hacker. I do the same thing for NearCMD, legitimate program. In this case, I did have to use a hash because it's not signed. These are like the 32 and 64-bit, and then there's two of them. I don't know why. However, the program has not been updated in a while. The most recent version is from like 2019, and I don't think he even has a place to download old versions. So just blocking in this case is fine for this one with hashes. Now, for the rest of these, block all screensaver files. I would recommend that. Almost no one uses screensaver files anymore, and they are executables. Not many people know that. Now, block.com files, these are another type of file that not many people know are executables. I would definitely block this because sometimes hackers have been known to name a file and use the .com to trick you into thinking that the file name is referring to a website. Like YouTubers were getting hacked because the file might be contract for thing on youtube.com, but the .com was the actual file extension. So it's good to have this blocked explicitly just in case, you know, you don't know if there is some allow rule you have that might get caught up allowing this that you don't intend. So I would just block it. And I do have exceptions for Microsoft, of course. And then I also have a specific file from Adobe for After Effects. I literally did a search on my computer, and this was the only other .com file that was not from Microsoft. So I just added a publisher rule for that specific file. And it's not a hash because if it gets updated, it still is signed, so it'll still allow it. So that is one thing to consider if you want to allow a specific file that's signed and you want it to continue being allowed even through an update. You could do a publisher rule to allow and just set it to file name, not the file version. So it'll allow anything by that publisher, product name, file name. And you might be wondering, wait a minute, if the file gets renamed, then it's gonna break the rule, but that's not actually the case. So let me show you something. Here is a program that I publish. It's my AI meme generator, and this is digitally signed, but before I sign it, I just had it named AI meme generator.exe. And the important thing to know is when a file is digitally signed, it includes the original file name. So assuming it's digitally signed, there should be in the details a original file name, and that is what the rule will be applied to. So you could name this whatever you want. It's still going to allow it, even if it's a different file name, because the original file name is the same. And that actually comes into play in these rules that I have here. And I can explain why I'm blocking PowerShell. But basically, PowerShell is obviously very important to Windows. It's used by a lot of stuff. However, a lot of times what malware will do is copy the PowerShell executable out of the Windows directory somewhere else and then use it for malicious purposes. So what I did was create rules for, I'll do the PowerShell regular one here first. So it's a deny rule for the publisher. And you might think, whoa, we're blocking Microsoft. But no, it's blocking PowerShell.exe. And you're thinking, okay, well, that's going to block it, right? But no, then you create an exception. And these are where I found, personally, PowerShell to be located originally with Windows, where it should be. So as long as PowerShell is running out of one of these directories, which it should be anyway, it will be allowed to run. But if a program copies it anywhere else and then tries to use it, it will be blocked. And remember, you could say, oh, well, it's just going to be allowed if they change the file name because it's not PowerShell.exe anymore. But remember, it is going to use the original file name with the signed signature. Why don't I give a quick demonstration of this? So I literally just copied PowerShell.exe from the Windows directory. And why don't we rename it to fake name? And then if we go into the AppLocker settings, executable, create a new rule, and then do a publisher, and we then use that as the reference file, you can see it still says PowerShell.exe because that was the original signed name. So it doesn't matter what you rename it, it'll still work. So rename it won't do anything. And again, you could say, well, what if they remove this signature? Well, then it won't be signed anymore and it won't run at all. So that's how I have that. Now, if you decide to use this, I would not rely 100% on these paths. This was the case in my computer, but depending on when you watch this in the future, it might change. So just keep an eye on that while in audit mode, or of course you can just not use this rule at all. And then I also have a rule for PowerShell ISE. This is their like IDE basically, and that can be used to run PowerShell scripts as well. Same thing. And then here actually is another one for PowerShell 7. This is a newer version of PowerShell that is installed separately. And this one is actually, apparently the original file name is pwsh.dll, even though when I looked at it, it was .exe, and that just goes to show that originally, apparently, it was called PowerShell.dll, but it doesn't matter what it's called. And then here's where it is installed to. So it's allowed to run out of these, but it's not if some malware brings its own copy, for example. I also did create another rule for pwsh.exe where I manually typed this in because, like I showed you, the other one was DLL. I wasn't sure if there might be versions of the PowerShell original where it is .exe. So I just created that one as well. That might be unnecessary, but that's the case. And again, the exceptions are the same. And again, like I said, what I'll do is export this policy as an XML, put in the description a link so you can just install it yourself, and it will replace all your current rules. So don't go and create a bunch of rules and then import it because it will overwrite everything. So you want to do this from the beginning. I will have it configured as audit only to start. And then if you want to enforce these, you're going to have to change them to enforced yourself. And I don't know if you'll have to do this yourself or if that will work with the policy that you import, but maybe just check to make sure the DLLs are there. And again, if you see anything weird happening, you're going to want to check in the event log viewer. Now, I do also want to point out, you're going to see a bunch of these entries for PS script test thing .ps1. And this is okay. This is basically just PowerShell. I think every time it runs, uses these scripts to check if AppLocker is enabled and blocking PowerShell scripts. So these are normal. I would not create any kind of rule to allow these. That's on purpose so that PowerShell will, know that it's blocked and run PowerShell in a constrained language mode, it's called. I'm not going to really get into that, but if you see a bunch of these, just know that that's normal. You might have to kind of dig through multiple of these. They kind of show up and they're randomly named. Now, another thing, if you don't know what I'm talking about with PowerShell 7 and you don't have it installed, I would just go into these exceptions and delete it and just block it altogether. If you don't have it installed, there's no reason it should be running, and this will just add some protection in case something tries to copy itself into one of these locations to still run. Now, I might add more rules before I upload them that I don't have here, so don't be surprised if I add more. So what you do is just go to AppLocker, import policy, find the XML file, and if you do want to create the default rules, you can still do that at any point. So even though I have these all set up, you can still create the default rules. They will still show up, and you can, again, just delete them if you want and create them again whenever you want. So no worries there. And the same goes for any of the other file types. Okay, now I need to explain something very important with how AppLocker works with PowerShell scripts specifically. So I'm going to be using this file as an example, test.ps1. And inside this, it's very simple. It just says write output hello from inside the script. Don't worry about this line just yet. And right now, my AppLocker policies only allow signed scripts. So if it's not signed, it shouldn't be able to run, and that script is not signed. So let's try and run this. I'll type it in, and it should be blocked. But hold on, it says hello from inside the script. It ran. And here's another crazy thing, is if we go in and refresh in the event viewer log, it says that it was prevented from running, but it was not. And this is extremely important to understand. Basically, AppLocker works differently with PowerShell scripts. It doesn't actually block them from running, from my understanding. It just changes the allowed modules and commands that can be given, and it's in something called constrained language mode. So if I uncomment that and then run it again, that line is set to display the constrained language, or the actual language mode, in this case, constrained language. And this is really important to know because it could give you a false sense of security if you have PowerShell scripts blocked and it says that it was blocked, but it could have actually ran. And in my case, this actually was really concerning in my previous video because I did see in the event viewer log that a malicious script was prevented from running. And then afterwards, I learned that this is how a PowerShell works with AppLocker. It might not have actually been. And it took me a lot of testing to realize that the way it was run through the Visual Studio, I guess it still wasn't allowed to run for whatever reason. It wasn't allowed to run, but I actually tested all the stuff that it would have ran, all the commands, and it actually would have worked. So I do not like that this is how it works, but that's just how it has to work. So there's a couple ways to defend against this. But first, I will demonstrate if you do actually allow a script. So we can go and allow this one. So if I do that, now I explicitly allowed this. And if I run it again, you can see now it's in this full language mode. So it's unrestricted. So it will go into full language mode if it's allowed. If it's not, it doesn't block the script from running. It just blocks it from running in full language. Now that, from my understanding, is unique to PowerShell scripts. If you block other types of script files like batch files, it should still work. But just again, it's really important to know that. So one thing you should definitely do is go to turn Windows features on and off, and you're going to want to look for Windows PowerShell 2.0. This is already unchecked for me, but it should be enabled by default, and you want to uncheck this. Disable this. PowerShell 2.0 is really just there for backwards compatibility. It is very insecure and easy to bypass the AppLocker restrictions altogether. So uncheck that, and it's a little bit better. Okay, now I want to tell you about setting the execution policy, it's called in PowerShell. Basically, that will allow you to set which scripts are allowed to run or any at all. So to see what it currently is, you can use in PowerShell get execution policy space dash list, and it'll tell you, and probably by default, they're all going to be undefined, which is the equivalent of being restricted. I'll put all the possible options here. Basically, bypass allows anything to run, no warnings or anything. Unrestricted allows anything to run, but for some, it'll ask you if you want to trust the script writer. Then there's remote signed, which allows scripts that were created locally, but if they were downloaded from the internet, they won't be able to run unless it's signed. That's not that reliable because it's really easy to remove the marker that marks it from the web. Then there's all signed, which allows any script that is signed with a code signing certificate. And then there's restricted, which allows no scripts to run at all, no PowerShell scripts. And these different scopes are where these rules would apply. And like I just said, undefined by default is the equivalent of restricted. So by default, PowerShell scripts should not be able to run on your system. However, it is extremely easy to bypass that, which I'll show you in a second. And also the ordering of these here is the ordering of the priority. So the machine policy wins against anything else, and local machine is the least prioritized. So since everything's undefined, if we tried to run an example like test.ps1, it should say it will not work because running scripts is disabled on this system. And that's because it's basically restricted. But like I said, it's extremely easy to bypass this. It's not really even that much of a security feature. It's just so you accidentally don't run a script, but that means that malware can easily do that. So if we were to do something like this command, set execution policy bypass, scope is this process. So this is literally just going to ignore the execution policy. So if I do it again, there it runs. So you can imagine this is not even with admin privileges. Yeah, it would help if you yourself are accidentally running a malicious script, but if the virus is using another program to run a PowerShell command, it always is going to have the bypass parameter in there. There is a way to stop that, which I'll go over in a second though. If you do want to, it might make sense to set the execution policy as restricted explicitly. So you could do this. So you would have to be running this as admin, but this is the command you would use. And then that would make the local machine restricted, but remember that can still be bypassed. Now, I said there is a way to block the bypassing of the rules, and that is using these two options here, machine policy and user policy. However, those are only able to be set through the group policy editor, so you can only use that with Pro, but if you're watching this video, AppLocker also requires Pro, so you probably have that. So you can find that under Administrative Templates, Windows Components, and this is under Computer Configuration, by the way, and then down to Windows PowerShell. And here's the setting, turn on script execution. So by default, it is not configured, and that just leaves everything as undefined. If we do enabled, we can then choose it to be one of these. And again, that's going to correspond to the machine policy. So let's set it, for example, to only signed scripts. And now if we get execution policy, I probably have to run a new instance of it. Yep, now we can see that machine policy is all signed. So if we try to do that bypass again, it's going to give us an error, and it says it updated your execution policy successfully, but the setting was overridden by a policy defined at a more specific scope, which is what we just did. So that's what this is talking about. And if we do get execution policy again, we can see, yeah, the process is set to bypass, but it's all signed. So if we do .test ps1 again, we can see that now it will not run because the group policy 1, which is the all signed. Now, if you want to set the machine policy to restricted, you can just set this to disabled. So we can just show that again. We do get execution policy. Now it says restricted. So this would not allow any scripts to run on the entire computer at all. Even if you try to use a bypass, you would have to go into the group policy settings. So if you don't use PowerShell at all, you're not running scripts specifically, you can still run commands, but no scripts, then I would probably just do this because it will stop a lot of malware techniques from not being able to run, because one of the first things they do is try to bypass it. Now, some of them might use some kind of policy to get around the group policy editor. I'm not sure, but I'm sure this will protect you against a lot. Now, while you're in here, I would also recommend turning on this turn on PowerShell script block logging here and go to enabled, turn that on, and then, yeah, just check it and okay. And now this will add logging in the event viewer. And I believe it would appear under here, Microsoft, Windows, and then PowerShell. And this should tell you whenever something tried to run that was indeed blocked, and it'll actually tell you the error message that happened. So I believe this is more reliable than the AppLocker thing. So I wanted that to show at the top. So I right-clicked it, go to create custom view, and then go through the thing. It'll put it under custom views right at the top here. And then apparently this turn on PowerShell transcription would literally keep track of everything that was typed into PowerShell and given out. So you might want to look at that one too if you wanted. Now, one final thing I really need to point out is if you have PowerShell 7 installed, which is a separate installation from Windows PowerShell, then it's going to not respect these execution policies. So we can see that here if we do type that in. We can see the default for this is undefined for everything, and then local machine is actually remote signed. So this means that basically you can run all scripts on your computer unless it's remote, which is not usual. So if we do test.ps1, you can see it ran, whereas if we do the same thing in Windows PowerShell, it does not run. So how do you deal with this? Well, you can change the process, current user, and local machine policies. Again, these have to be done separately from what Windows PowerShell does. However, if you want to do machine policy and user policy, you have to do something extra. It's not really hard, but you have to do it. And what you need to do is go into the installation path of PowerShell 7, which in my case, I installed it through the Microsoft Store. So it's under Windows Apps and then Microsoft PowerShell. If you installed it through like GitHub, it would be under Program Files and then PowerShell, I believe. But same thing, just go into there and then look for this script right here. And what you want to do is navigate to there with PowerShell 7 and make sure you're running it as admin. And it has to also be PowerShell 7, not Windows PowerShell. Then what you can do is just go and copy the name of this, do / paste it, and run it. It won't show anything, but when you go back into the group policy editor, now you will see a new thing under administrative templates and PowerShell core. You'll probably have to refresh this. I already did this, that's why it shows up. And now you'll see basically the same options you had in the other ones, and this is a separate one. So now there is both the Windows PowerShell down here and the PowerShell 7 version up here. It's under PowerShell core. Now, fortunately, as you can see, there is an option if you enable it to just use PowerShell policy settings. So this will just make it so it always uses that other Windows PowerShell thing, so you don't have to change both every time. Although I do think you have to set this anyway, even though if you have this checked, this doesn't matter, but you still have to enable it or else it'll give you an error. So now if we open up a new one, if we do list, we can see that the machine policy is all signed, just like it is over here. And actually, just to show that it is indeed copying the policy and not just using this dropdown, I'll say allow all scripts and open a new one. You can see it still says all signed. I don't know why it makes you select that here, but it just does. But as long as you have this checked, you're good. Now, if you're wondering which of these you should choose or whether to keep it at disabled, I personally keep it at all signed just because I do use PowerShell occasionally, and I guess I could always go in here and change it if I needed to, but I trust signed scripts, so I'm just going to keep it like this. But again, if you don't use PowerShell to run scripts specifically, like you could use it for commands and stuff still, but if you don't run scripts, I would just keep this at disabled. And it still lets Windows itself run like official scripts in the installation directory and stuff. It's just any users can't run scripts. So I think, in my opinion, it's important to at least set this or disabled, which will stop malware from being able to just bypass the policy, which is really easy to do. All right, finally, I realized I am talking a lot about signed files, but you might be wondering, how do you check if a file is actually signed? And that's pretty simple. I have a few examples here. One is signed. So if you just right click it and go to Properties and Explore, you'll see a tab that says Digital Signatures that will not appear if a file is unsigned. And you can see this is a PS1. This is actually a PowerShell script, so scripts can be signed in addition to executables. Here's a exe that is not signed, and you can see that there is no Digital Signatures tab. But another thing you have to check is if the signature is actually valid, and you could do that by clicking on it and hitting Details. And if it says the signature is okay, then it is trusted by Windows. If it says some other thing, there's going to be an error message. It might be self-signed, which means it's a signature, but it's not one that goes back to a root authority. So you can't really trust where it came from. But if it says okay, then it goes back to a root authority, and that's one that should be trusted by AppLocker and allowed to run. All right, so hopefully by now you know everything you need to know about using AppLocker, and if you decide to go that route, then you should be prepared. Let me know down in the comments if this is something you are gonna do, or if you're like, no, this is too much for me, I don't wanna deal with it. If you did enjoy this very long video, please give it a giant thumbs up if you've reached this point for the YouTube algorithm, and maybe consider subscribing if you haven't already. I try to make videos about twice a week, usually Wednesday and Saturday, although I took an extra day on this one. And if you want to keep watching, the next video I'd recommend is where I talked about that time I almost got hacked and PowerShell helped me out. So I'll put that link right there. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.